we've got obviously a new defensive coordinator. Got rid of Tim Banks. We brought in Jim Knowles, who was on most big boards, and he's a great defensive coordinator, former Penn State, Ohio State guy, and he brought with him a few of his coaches from Penn State. So the new coaches, as it stands, we have got Anthony Poindexter Austin as the secondary. As the
Co-defensive
co-defensive
coordinator.
coordinator,
Yep.
and the co-defense coordinator and the safeties coach. And then we have got Michael Hunter Jr. as the cornerbacks coach, replacing Willie Martinez. We're going to talk about that in particular here in a second. And then we've got amazing name for a Tennessee coach, Andrew Jackson, coaching the kind of new kind of position, the LEO position, which is a hybrid linebacker edge position, Austin, that you see in some defensive schemes nowadays. So he's going to be coaching there. And then we retained William Inge and we retained Rodney Garner, which obviously Rodney Garner is a big one to retain. We might talk about William Inge as well, Austin. We are kind of confused on that one. And then strength and conditioning coach, we have not replaced him yet, but we have not renewed the contract for Kurt
Correct.
Schmidt, the director of strength and conditioning. Austin, talk us through all these names and these changes.
Yeah, some interesting ones. Definitely. I think I mean, honestly, dude, it's weird because if you look back at just our live chat or if you look at Twitter a couple weeks ago, Heupel essentially fired everyone that the fans wanted fired. It's kind of weird. It's one of those situations where, maybe the fans just identified the right guys that needed to be replaced, or the more worrisome scenario, which is Heupel and maybe even Danny White's trying to appease the fan base. And I know Danny White doesn't get involved in insistence, but maybe he put pressure on Heupel to make some changes. It's also interesting that the second wave of changes happened after the bowl game. It's almost like that was enough was enough with the
Right.
assistants kind of a thing, because all that happened after we lost to Illinois. After we made the move for Jim Knowles, I also made the point to you that when you hire a defensive coordinator, he's likely going to want to bring some staff with him. And that's kind of what ended up happening. Right. He went out and got Poindexter, which I think is a phenomenal hire, by the way. He has a really good resume and has really, I think Poindexter, for one, they're all good recruiters. But him in particular, he's not just a good recruiter. He's been a good recruiter, but also more importantly, good with player development. That's what Penn State has kind of made a name for themselves before, James Franklin got fired or whatever, and it kind of the wheels fell off this year. But before that, they made a name for themselves, Blake, for taking 3 and 4-star talent and making them play like, NFL 5-star level talent, which is kind of what we need a little bit, right? We need a little bit of that. We're recruiting better. We're still not recruiting absolute, pinnacle, I would say. We're not top 3 every year or whatever. It's getting better, but also there's been a little bit of lack of developing some younger players. Now that there's, some guys that have worked out or whatever, but then there's other guys where it seems like, okay, the development's just not been there when it probably should be at this point. So I'm pretty excited about that from a defensive perspective. There was obviously a theme. It was all on the defensive side of the ball, and it should have been, right, Blake? I mean, the defense was once again awful in the Music City Bowl, like we already discussed. I don't know if that part got destroyed because of lag, but we discussed that at some point. And then the strength and conditioning is interesting. That's a name, again, Blake, we weren't really talking about, but a lot of fans were, dude. A lot of fans came in our chat and said, hey, we need to fire the strength coach. We need to fire the strength coach. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, they didn't retain him, which basically means you're not working here anymore. So it's essentially getting fired. So basically, fans got what they wanted, and we have a completely revamped staff next year.
Brother, we are unsynced again. I think you are done talking, but yes, so I agree that look, the Poindexter hire is looking fantastic, and I can't wait to see what he can do. Um, so let's get into the nuances of some of the changes and retentions, right? So we got Eric in the chat saying, hey, I like Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator and the fact they retained Gardner and Coach Inge for the linebackers, the two I wanted to retain, and he replaced the coaches I wanted to replace in Willie Martinez. So maybe let's talk about Michael Hunter Jr. and Willie Martinez first, Austin. A lot of fans were down on Willie Martinez, and it's understandable to an extent, right? Because we had some bad years in the secondary, particularly at cornerback. However, Austin, the recent evidence is that this is a guy who went into the portal and got two guys in Jermon McCoy and Colton Hood and developed them into first round draft picks or projected first round draft picks. And so, Austin, it's, to me, it's not as clear cut that Willie Martinez needed to be replaced. Now Michael Hunter Jr., he seems like he's a good up and coming guy, no doubt. He's coming from Ohio State. He's been in Jim Knowles' system.
Yep.
And so maybe it's, Jim Knowles needing to bring in his guys. But to me, it's not as clear cut that Martinez wasn't doing a good job because he was producing some, and Ty Simpson, Austin. Or not Ty Simpson, I'm sorry.
Ty
Redmond.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the points you made, Blake, interesting. I will say the replacement, like you said, he's came from Ohio State, really good recruiter. So that's something to be excited about. And I think that's part of the decision. And yeah, I mean, and again, this Willie Martinez is a guy that a lot of people wanted to replace. I think it was because he saw over all of the secondary, not just corners. It was also safeties. But I mean, his resume for developing corners can't go unrecognized in my opinion. I mean, like you said, Jermon McCoy and Colton Hood in back-to-back years finding talent in the portal and immediately making them first-round talents. And then you have Ty Redmond this year who comes in as a true freshman. And you could say, hey, if you come in as a true freshman and play well, it's probably just because you're really talented. You didn't get a lot of developing, but I think it's a mixture of both. It's not like Ty Redmond was not an elite recruit. I think by some recruiting outlets, he was a 3-star. So, yeah, I mean, I think Martinez, I think there is a little nuance to it. Also think there's just, it's the simple fact that Jim Knowles wanted some of his guys in there, some guys he's coached with. He's coached with everyone we've brought in, which makes sense. And there's also something too, Blake, just kind of the reset. And I mean, a lot of my buddies and you and other fans have talked about the linebackers coach, William Inge, and kind of like how he got, how did he get retained amongst everyone else? And I get that, like, because the linebackers haven't performed well. I think a part of the reason he got retained is because his recruiting this past cycle in particular. And a lot of those guys that we signed, like Hypo probably sees those signees and are saying, hey, we want to keep those signees. We want to develop those guys that we have coming in because it's such a good linebacking class. And, getting rid of the linebacker coach could potentially hurt that. So I think that's part of it, likely. And then I think everyone was happy to see Rodney Gardner is coming back and being retained because he's been phenomenal since he's been here. Absolutely incredible. So, overall, man, I'm pretty positive about the coaching changes. Yep. I just want it to result in what we're going to talk about next, which is obtaining portal talent, because we need talent on the defense now. We need it right now. And we'll talk about our departures, the guys leaving for the NFL. But it's also just the simple fact that we weren't good enough last year. Even if everyone was coming back, we just weren't good enough last year. So we need to go out and get talent on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, we definitely do. And we're, like you said, we're hoping that these new coaches are going to help in bringing in that great talent in addition to developing them. Final note on the coaches, we kind of briefly touched on it. So again, strength and conditioning coach Kurt Schmidt was not renewed, and so we're going to be revamping the strength and conditioning staff, which Bob, I brought up a good point in the chat. How much can we really know about the strength and conditioning? I think, obviously if you see a certain product on the field, you start to question, if our guys are getting gassed and not conditioned right and that kind of thing. If your guys are not putting on the kind of muscle that you would hope they would and things like that. But regardless, as it stands, we're changing it up there. And as far as we know, Austin, right now, no one has been hired. There's been a couple kind of weird, maybe false reports on some people, but as it stands right now, it doesn't look like we know who is going to be replacing Kurt Schmidt and his staff yet. But we'll keep a pulse on that for sure, and we'll definitely, we'll mention it once it comes out. So y'all be looking out for that news. Shout out to Backflip Spaghetti in the chat, and shout out to Dylan in the chat. Dylan says, I feel like the strength conditioning coach stuff is warranted. It told me a lot that Vandy and Illinois were blowing us off the ball on the line of scrimmage. I think that's a fair point from Dylan. Austin. You never want to be bullied by Vanderbilt. That's for sure.
No, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, and I get that. I mean, there's some argument. I also get Baba/Rick's point in the chat, which is like, some fans have opinions that may be kind of baseless, and they're just kind of hoping for a fix and why the team's playing poorly. And, that's kind of where I was with it. But at the same time, I get it. Like if you're getting out physical by Vandy, there's a reason. There is a reason to potentially want to get a new strength coach. So overall, man, I have no issues. I mean, my biggest thing was getting rid of Tim Banks. And that happened, and we got a solid guy. We'll see how well everything meshes together. That's the next question. Like, will these guys, and again, Jim Knowles has coached with the guys we've hired. He hasn't coached with some of the other guys on the staff that have been retained. So how will that all mesh? Will it work? How quickly will it work? My only thing, what's keeping me positive about the situation is it's hard to see it get worse, right? It's hard, like, how could it get any worse, right? I mean, our defense was one of the worst in the country last year, one of the worst in the SEC. I mean, the only reason we're not the worst in the SEC defensively is because Arkansas exists. If Arkansas didn't exist, we would have been the worst in the SEC defensively. So I believe it will get better. I don't know how much better. I don't know if we'll be a top 5 defense by next year or not. I obviously hope so, but I do expect it to get better. Just because, again, this year it reached a pretty low point defensively.
It did indeed reach a very low point and resulted in some losses that shouldn't have been losses. And so, yeah, excited to see what these new coaches can bring in terms of development. We got Eric in the chat talking about development. And so, yeah, I'd love to see not only the recruitment, like you said, Austin, the recruiting, but also the development.